This is Knowable.
Hey, Ryan from Knowable here. What you're about to listen to is a recording of one of our live weekly office hours hosted on Clubhouse. Every Friday, we get together to talk about the week's lessons live, hear from Knowable teachers, answer questions in real time, and generally have a great conversation. Now, this is entirely unedited, so what you're about to hear is the event exactly as it happened live. Let's go.
Hey, Kat.
Hey, hey.
All right.
How are you?
Doing really well. Excited to speak with you.
Yeah, likewise.
We'll give people a few minutes to trickle in, but I'll quickly set the stage and then reset periodically as people join. But we're going to be talking about some of the lessons that you have been kind enough to share on Knowable. You recorded some audio lessons that are available totally for free, and they're focused on lessons for leadership and overall success. And excited to kind of give a preview of those lessons in our conversation here, and then also take some questions from the audience and hopefully answer some practical questions that people have around becoming better leaders. And I certainly have some questions for you. But anything else, Kat, that you want to talk about or mention? And again, I'll do a reset and a refresh and an intro for you as people join.
I think the thing that makes me excited about Knowable, which is something similar that makes me excited about Clubhouse, is just all of these tools that allow us to have access to information in the size of nibble that we want to digest. And whether that's long form or short form or live or recorded, if you're going to be, in my mind, if I'm going to be talking, I'd rather have the opportunity to touch many, in addition to few. And it's one of the things I love about Clubhouse, because we can have a chat, and arguably that's one to few, but yet the audience is listening. And so that adds a one to many impact for those who catch a piece of it. And then if segments are recorded and published, that's really reaching many. And I just think that's so powerful. So I'm excited about Knowable. I'm excited about audio courses generally. I do think as the world opens back up or gets back to growing, I don't know that commuting goes back to what it was. I hope it doesn't. But certainly travel, people being on the road and exploring. I still feel there's so much ear space in our minds. We want to be less on Zoom, less watching video. Audio is just a lower cognitive load, and our brains can focus on other things. Or if we're just listening, we're really absorbing. So I'm a fan of audio knowledge, audio courses. And I love what we've done, which is create little mini, tiny sound bites, little appetizer courses that can get people intrigued to go deeper or not. So I'm just a fan. I'm grateful for what you guys are building, and think Knowable as a layer on top of Clubhouse, for me, feels like a really smart way to spend time to share expertise and mistakes and lessons.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Kat. And the admiration is absolutely mutual. Just by way of background, since we did have a bunch of people who just joined, I am the co-founder and the CEO of Knowable. And Knowable is an audio-first learning platform. I started the company along with some of the other people that are going to be joining up on stage here, really to solve a personal problem and as Kat, you mentioned, I wanted to keep learning and growing both as a leader and beyond. But as a new parent, couldn't find time for long video courses. But audio is something that can fit into my life. It allows me to keep learning when I'm washing dishes or going for a run or on a commute. And so on Knowable, what we do is we have lessons of various length. And Kat, you've been so kind to share some of your lessons that you've learned in a format that's daily and available this week. So anyone can go for free and check out the Knowable app and listen to some of your best wisdom on leadership. And the lessons are about 15 minutes a day. And there's a quiz and lesson notes as well. So that, again, we can kind of reach people wherever they are from you. They can go and check out your Knowable audio lessons. So I encourage everyone to if you're not already following Knowable, you can tap that green house icon at the top and follow. We have weekly live events with leading thinkers like Kat Cole and leading authors where we distill some of their best thoughts and invite discussion from the audience as well. So the goal for this discussion today is to give a preview of what Kat talks about in her Knowable lessons that I just mentioned, and then also invite some questions from the audience to talk about practical situations where people are trying to improve as a leader. I certainly am, and we can hopefully get Kat's input and do some live coaching. So Kat, why don't we kind of kick it off by talking a little bit about the overview of the lessons that you cover in your Knowable mini course. First off, we talk a lot about the qualities of leadership. Can you kind of quickly give a preview of what you go into more detail in, especially the qualities of effective leadership?
Yeah, I think, and definitely cue me up with some of those.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Since we clipped it down, since it is these are smaller nuggets, my answer now live is probably more broad than what we have in the, no in that time. But just this, one I would say is staying incredibly close to the customer and close to the action. Another is just deep humility. And the hard part is, as you move up, as you lead people, as great as you are, as humble as you are, especially if you've had success over time. If you've had success over time, we become blinded by our own progress. And this combination of humility that there's always something going on in my company that I don't know, or my team. Maybe you're not running the company, but you're managing a team. There's always some perspective that I would benefit from knowing, but that I don't know. And while I can't know everything, there are some things I can and should know that would help me be a better leader. So this combination of being super humble and staying really close to the customer and the employees is like it's like a lethal leadership threat. If you don't do it, it's so detrimental. If you do master that connection, it can be incredibly powerful. But maybe if you could highlight some of those points and then we can go into them.
Yeah, I mean, humility is such an important one that you talk about. You also talk about really knowing yourself and truth seeking in general, empathy and being able to relate to both teammates and to customers, and then personal accountability as well. And you have this great line where you say, I would be failing you if ... And so I think all of that is talked about in the lessons, and we don't have to go into total detail on all of these. Again, the goal is to just give an overview of what you cover in your Knowable lessons this week, and then hopefully have some time here at the end too for questions from the audience and some real life case studies too.
Yeah, I do want to double click on that. The connection between all of those things that we talk about in the Knowable mini course are things that regularly come up on Clubhouse, in Leadership Lab, my club that I run, and my office hours. Almost always, whatever the challenge is, there is some combination of these topics that are the solution. One, knowing yourself, and checking in to know ourselves and understand how others perceive us. Over time, right? It changes over time. And when I say over time, I don't even mean over years. I mean, if we're going through some shit, in a moment, maybe more of that is leaking out than we realize, and affecting how people see us. And then they interpret that vibe that they pick up from us as a leader, and almost place it on them and wonder like, wow, is she reacting to me? Or is she frustrated or nervous about something the team is working on, when it might be something very personal? So this know thyself, like the rule, know thyself first, know thy audience second, and know thy environment third, and use those things regularly to craft communication, to check in with people, to potentially pivot the strategy based on what the company needs. That know yourself, still that's got a little bit of that humility mixed in there, is such a foundation. And I will say, for people who've been on teams for a long time, it can become a weakness because you grow around each other, each other, your quirks, you can get away with a lot with people who know you well. And on one hand, that's good because it allows you to really be you and not worry about it. On the other hand, you're not actually honing those communication and presence skills. And I had to do that early on because I was leading a different team in a different country every few months. And so I didn't have the privilege of having a regular team for a long period of time who knew what I meant when I said a word or a joke, right? Every few months, I was with a new team who were just reacting to me at the surface. And it taught me, the importance of checking in, of paying attention to how people react to me. And then I can decide, do I care or not? And even if I care, should I change or not? I mean, those are the questions I should ask myself. And then I need to answer them and make a decision on if I'm going to behave differently or not.
Right. I want to come back to this idea of asking questions because you do talk about it in your Knowable course. But first, I want to do a quick reset and then also give a little bit more background to everyone who's listening for those of you who might not know about Kat. So quick reset is this Kat has recorded some lessons on leadership, and they're available totally for free on the Knowable app. You can listen to her distilled wisdom on the topic, and then you should also go ahead and follow her here on Clubhouse. She's very active, and then also has a great club called Leadership Lab. And Knowable is an audio first learning platform, and so we're going to be talking about what Kat covers in her mini course in today's discussion, and also inviting questions from the audience. For those of you who don't know, Kat has over a decade of experience leading some of America's most iconic brands, including Cinnabon, Jamba Juice, and Auntie Anne's, so really household names. And she led them and grew them through some of the most challenging times for any direct-to-consumer business. So, and then Kat also has a really inspiring story. She has an unconventional background in terms of being tapped at a very early age to lead some of these important business brands. She grew up in a single family household, and she's been kind enough to share her story openly. And I find it personally very inspiring, and hope that you will follow her and learn more about her, because she really is an iconic leader in many ways. And so Kat, I feel free if there's anything else that you want to mention on your background that you think would be relevant, but then otherwise would love to double click on that topic of asking better questions. It is something you talk about in your Knowable course, and I think it's so powerful for everyone to get better at.
Yeah, let's jump into that. I mean, it's a theme of a book that I'm working on, this formula of asking, answering, and acting, and then repeat, right? Ask, answer, act. And what we ask and learning to ask better questions is the first step in using that formula to keep growing, I've found, as a person, despite being in moments or seasons or eras of very little access to resources. It's interesting how just pausing to ask, answer, and act repeatedly creates this consciousness, this awareness of who I am, who others are, how we're interacting in the moment, and then how do I feel about that? What do I want to do differently? And then making the decision to do differently. And that leads to getting better at things faster than many other people do. Because often the only time that we as humans radically improve our behavior is when we are shocked into doing so. We are forced by a tragedy or a crisis, or we don't have another option. It's just natural. It's human nature to seek comfort and to not do things differently. And getting comfortable with discomfort is something that people throw around all the time as a statement, but actually talking about what that looks like and realizing that discomfort, friction, nervousness, anxiety, worry, all of these things are part of growth. And the way to bring more growth is to actually ask more questions instead of being the one only answering questions or just reacting. If you're only on defense, you miss a lot of opportunities. And I want to be the one who asks myself questions. I want to be the one who asks my team questions. Certainly there will be times that people bring things to my attention that I did not solicit. But I like being more proactive instead of worrying. You know how you think like, ooh, I don't know what I'm going to find under that rock. I'm going to leave it alone. I want to know what's under that rock. I want to seek the truth. And I've told stories about how I've sought the truth. And then when I find it, promising to never use whatever I find for evil or harm, including to myself. And sometimes if you are an active seeker of the truth, you find hurtful things. And understanding that there's a choice in how we respond to hurtful things. It's rather what we do with that information that that really matters. That also has to be a choice. It has to be a mindset. Some people are in a season or a moment. I've been in those where I'm sensitive or I'm delicate, and knowing what the truth sometimes holds, which often is there's something I could do better as a leader, especially in a position of leadership, that can be heavy. But it is simply part of the process.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that phrase. Discomfort is a part of growth, because I think a lot of people don't ask the hard questions because the answers may not be what they want to hear. And so you talk about in your Knowable course, this importance of any leader talking with customers, talking with frontline employees, and really trying to solicit honest and candid feedback, even if it is not the what you want to hear. Can you talk, Kat, a little bit more about a question that people will often ask, maybe a junior or a beginning leader will ask, and then kind of workshop that question to be a more powerful question? And happy, we can talk a little bit specifically about the Hotshot Rule, for example. I think that's such a great question. It's one that I've put into practice since you and I spoke, and think it's such a powerful framework. But anything else that you would want to go deeper on in terms of asking better questions when you are trying to become a better leader?
Yeah, I mean, this is just, I think, what I've learned about asking better questions, period, whether it's about making your business better, refining your product offering, or becoming a better leader. But I often find people ask questions that fall into some zip code of something like this. Do you like this? On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to use this? What's wrong with that question is it suggests that I would actually use it. But now you're forcing me to rank on a scale of 1 to 10, how usable it is. So you're kind of leading me. You're leading the witness. And do I like something, in many cases, is immaterial to the business. It's not about like, right? It's about what will drive customer behavior and what will drive employee behavior if we're thinking about an internal product or program. And so I have become very sensitive to questions like this. When I hear them come out of my own mouth, even as someone who preaches this, I am not immune to asking things that way. But certainly when I hear it from others, I try to respectfully redirect or double click. And instead of saying, hey, everyone, what do you think about this? I'll say, wait, before anyone answers, because what we think is going to lead us down a lot of minutes of chatter that is going to make us feel really good, but it may not be the highest and best use of time.
Right.
What we need to do to workshop that question is, first of all, what is the goal of the team and the company? Often one of the goals is to drive transactions or drive viewers or, whatever the metric is. Then the question is, does this thing, this visual, this product, this program, whatever you're talking about, does it have a high likelihood of driving that outcome? And when I learned this lesson, probably the most prominently was at Cinnabon. And I remember when I took over Cinnabon as president, I was very young. I was 31. It was my first time being a president of anything, much less a global business. And there was an initiative to reduce the calories of that giant cinnamon roll,
right,
which is 880 down to and hey, that's a lot less than people think. When usually I play a game and say, how many calories do you think is in the giant cinnamon roll? People are like 2,000, 3,000.
That's what I would have guessed a full meal. Yeah.
It's only 880. But still, that's a lot. And at the time, this was 2011. It was the peak of the Atkins craze, which was sort of the preceding nutritional program prior to keto and paleo and all of that. It basically said no sugar and no fat. And here I am running a business that is synonymous with sugar and fat. And so the team had a plan to launch a lower calorie Cinnabon cinnamon roll. Keep it giant, keep it the same size, because that's what the brand is famous for. And but make it lower calorie. Well, the only way you can make a food item lower calorie without reducing its size is removing real sugar and real fat and putting in substitutes. And so I didn't love that idea to begin with. I thought there were real issues on the back end of, even though people don't come to Cinnabon for their diet, they'll be less excited about indulging if now there's not real ingredients, but synthetic or more produced ingredients. And yet there was a bigger issue other than the downside of the way they were going to fix what they thought was the opportunity and the issue. It's that they really believed that a lower calorie cinnamon roll was going to drive the business. And the reason they believe this is they told people in focus groups, we're going to reduce the calories from 880 to below 600. How do you feel about that? Do you like it? Everybody said yes. Everybody. Of course. Who doesn't want to be bad without penalty? But the reality is when you ask the right question, which is, if we reduce the calories from 880 to 600, let me remind you, no one even knew it was 880 to begin with.
Right.
But if we do that, will you A, come more often, or B, try us if you previously would not? And 100% of those answers were no. For two reasons. One, again, there was a perception that if you lower the calories, it does something to the taste and the quality. So there was just a fear around the optics of that. But the second issue is that there is actually a limit, a line of calories that you have to go below in order to drive people's transactions, to treat it like a snack. And that is 300. And so here we are, double, even if we get it below 600, double the caloric requirement in our minds to be considered a snack and therefore drive transactions. So as much as people told us, yes, what you're doing is a good idea, which is a leading question. The reality is that idea, which by the way, the company spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and many mostly women hours on, was doomed to be a failure for those reasons. And I came in and said, we couldn't afford, it was the recession. We were getting crushed in sales because, people weren't traveling or shopping. And we couldn't keep spending money. And so I couldn't afford to do more research. I just said, I want every one of you to go ask three to five people that don't work for Cinnabon in your friends and family circle. Show them the calorie reduction and ask them this new question. If we do this, will you come more often or buy it more often? Or will you try us if you would not? And 100% of the responses were no. And so the flip of asking the right question, which is simply about, is this going to get us closer to the goal? And the goal is not people saying, that sounds like a good idea. The goal is people spending their money in that situation. And I have learned over and over and over that we are inclined to ask questions that validate our beliefs. And as a result, I have become paranoid and deeply skilled at asking questions that are more closely tied to whatever the goals are, no matter if I like what I'm going to hear or not. And in that case, I killed the initiative, and the team and the company was not happy. They were not happy with me because they'd done a lot of work. And they thought they were doing their job. And I cited it as a failure of leadership. To your point, I had to say, I would be failing you if I let this go on, because you know what's worse than having this initiative go away right now? Getting it fully to launch, spending time, money, energy, and franchisees' resources and hope, and having it not move the needle one bit. Yet you guys here in the office would high five each other and say, we did our job, must be the operator's fault, right? And so a good leader is not afraid to call something out, even if it's a well-invested path, to question if it should continue.
Wow, that's a really powerful case study story. I want to recap it and just sort of synthesize the lessons for me. So 2011, you're running Cinnabon. You're a young executive, and the company is facing both a recession and a change in cultural shift away from fatty, sugary foods. And there's a survey out that basically says, hey, would you come to Cinnabon more often if we lowered the calories from 880 to 600 or thereabouts? And I want to make sure I understand the shift in framing the question, Kat. So how was the question framed initially? And then what did the question get transformed to after you came in?
The question was, we're reducing the calories from 880 to below 600. Do you like it? Is it a good idea? Does it make you happy? Right? It was assuming that the calorie reduction was the goal. And when the question was reframed to, will this accomplish the goal? right? The work had become the goal. And
it was so leading, right?
And
it was assuming that they would like it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so well, here was the assumption. The assumption incorrectly was that liking it would translate to sales.
Right.
So the question needed to be, will this lead you to behaviors that drive sales? Will this make you come more often or buy more? Will this get you to try us if you previously were resistant? Those are asking questions about behaviors that result in transactions. And I have so many more examples of this. Like Campbell's Soup went into Russia and they were failing miserably. This is the highest soup consumption country in the world. And Campbell's, the world's largest commercial soup company out of North America, goes to Russia, right? Russians like soup. We are a soup company. We should be in Russia. They go, they fail miserably. The reason they failed miserably is they made the wrong assumption that just because they like soup, that they would buy canned soup. They failed to ask the right question and understand discretionary income. And when you asked people in Russia at this time, this was decades ago, at this time, what would you do? So they went in very similar to the Cinnabon team. They went in and said, we make soup. You like soup. Would you like the convenience of soup in a can? And everybody said yes, right? Green light, go. Campbell's open up a plant in Moscow or St. Petersburg, I think it actually was. Then again, a year later, they're tanking. No sales, horrible reputation. Plant's running great, but it's just not getting traction, which was so confusing for the team, given they had asked people, do you like soup? Do you want more convenient soup? And everybody said yes.
Right.
The question they failed to ask was a fundamental question about use of discretionary income. And when the new CEO came in to diagnose this issue, because they were being faced with shutting down the plant in Russia, which they eventually did, by the way, not because they had to, because they decided they wanted to, was because of this new question they asked, which was no longer, you like soup, would you like the convenience of soup in a can? It was, if you had an extra $1, what would you spend it on? And the answer in Russia at the time was denim and cosmetics for 80% of the population that made spending decisions. The answer was not on more convenient or better food for my family. By contrast, they did this exact survey all around the world and found in Central America that at this time, when the question was asked, if you had extra discretionary income, using the analogy of $1, what would you be most likely to spend it on? And the answer was better and more convenient food for my family. Because the reality is, putting a branded, slightly higher quality product in a can is about quality and convenience. And if people aren't in a space to spend money on quality and convenience, it doesn't matter how much they like the idea of their favorite meal in a can, they're actually not going to buy it. So, you can see a pattern here of asking questions of how people feel about something versus asking about what will they do. And even then it's a bit flawed because we don't always do what we say we're going to do, but it is a more accurate reflection of the psychology at play that will lead to behaviors. And this distinction between these types of questions for us to ask and then make sure we get enough answers to, and then again, do we act on it or not? Is it just nice to know? Or should we change something? In this case, Campbell's shut down the plant and opened one in Central America. I stopped Project 599 and we instead launched a Cinnabon that achieved that sub 300 calorie item with no poor ingredients, keeping the integrity of the inventory that we had and still accomplishing a goal. Because when I said, if we launch a smaller cinnamon roll that is 300 calories, when I asked the question, will you come more often? The answer was yes. When I asked the question, would you visit us if you previously wouldn't? The answer was yes. And there were other benefits to that approach. So again, getting good at the right question and then having the humility and the curiosity to ask often, be open to the answer, and then acting on it. This ask, answer, act over and over and over, because the world changes really quickly. And what was right a year ago is very likely not best today.
Right. I did not know about the Campbell soup example. But I think the framing for me here, my big takeaway is ask people what they will do. Don't ask them how they will feel, because the latter is really leading them oftentimes, right? It's, hey, do you like my new app? Is very different than, would you use this app every day?
That's right.
Yeah. Another question, Kat, and I'll quickly reset the room. So Knowable is an audio first learning platform. Hit that green house icon and follow us. We have weekly discussions with leading thinkers and authors. This week, we're so excited to be featuring free lessons from Kat Cole, who's up on stage here. Kat, if you don't know her already, is a very inspiring and impressive leader. She was at the helm of some of the world's most iconic brands like Cinnabon, which she was just talking about, and Auntie Anne's and Jamba, among others. So far, we've been talking about some of the basic lessons that she covers in her course. And Kat was kind enough to go deeper on some examples of how you can ask better questions as a leader and how that can have such a huge impact on a business. So just reframing the question from being a leading question, which is what we all default to. We want people to agree with our initial assumptions versus asking very specific action-oriented questions of what would you do if this was true. So Kat, another lesson that you talk about in your Knowable course is the idea of the Hotshot Rule. And I think a lot of people who are probably listening are thinking of ways that they can personally become a better leader today. And this rule that you shared, I found to be so powerful and effective at cutting through the noise of leadership advice and being very tactical and actionable. Do you mind talking about the Hotshot Rule for those that don't know? And then we can kind of use an example as well. And maybe we can save it for an audience question, but Hotshot Rule and what you think about it.
Yeah, this is, one of the practices that started as something very informal. And then I realized its benefits and became regimented and formal. And then it cycled from being formal to almost being subconscious because I practiced it so consistently, so often, it almost became a part of the way I think. And so I call it the Hotshot Rule. I've practiced it for 10 years. And it's simply this: I envision someone I admire. That's the hotshot. And I ask myself, if that person who I admire were in my seat tomorrow, and the seat is whatever role you're looking to grow in. So could be as a wife. Sometimes I practice the Hotshot Rule as a wife. Often it's my business role, but I think about it as a parent, as a daughter, as a friend, and as a wife as well, because I want to grow in those areas as well. So I think of someone I admire, and I don't overexercise myself on who it is. It's not even sometimes an obvious match for the role I'm considering. It's just a human that I admire. There's something about selecting someone you admire and who seems to be a Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head of awesomeness. Envisioning them in your seat. So I literally, I think of the person, I close my eyes, I envision them in my seat. So if today is Monday, I think of you, Warren, in my seat tomorrow. I'm gone, and you are running my endeavors, my companies. And
big shoes to fill.
And then I ask this one question: what is one thing, and the first thing, that Warren would do differently when he shows up on the job? And for whatever reason, when I ask myself to see my world through someone's eyes who I admire, the answer is very clear, incredibly quickly. And there are pretty obvious reasons, right? Often we're very close to knowing the things we need to be doing, but for many reasons, we're blinded by our own progress. And so it gets suppressed like a couple inches behind our eyes and our mouths. And we allow it to stay back there because things are good enough. Again, going back to this idea that we often have to be forced into changing. And so this is a way to mildly manufacture a crisis, and some competitiveness and some insight and some courage to see my world through someone else's eyes. And so I say, what would Warren do if he were in my seat tomorrow? One thing, only one thing. The world's hard enough. We don't need a list. And the answer becomes clear. I ask the question, I answer the question, and then I act on it within 24 hours. So, and I can give you many examples of how this has played out. We talk about it a bit in the Knowable mini course that's live now. But it usually has something to do with how I'm spending my time, that I would see that someone else with fresh eyes would address something with more urgency than I currently am. Again, because it's blended with the context. And this isn't the end of the Hotshot Rule yet, but I do want to pause on this moment, because in my mind, in my relationship with my husband, as a mom on a journey of a 19-month-old and a 3.5-year-old, and as a leader of many businesses, I am better off today than I was years past. Things are better. I have grown up and to the right? Not always up and to the right, but trending up and to the right. And so to me, my business and my world is the best it's ever been. But Warren, if you took over my seat tomorrow, that would be the worst it will ever be. Like, isn't that interesting? How in a 24-hour span, I can view my world as the best it's ever been. But if someone new takes over, it is literally the worst it will ever be, because they are there to move it forward.
Right.
And so once I get that answer to that question, what would Warren do if he were in my seat? And I answer the question, I then act on it in 24 hours. And then the final part of the Hotshot Rule is I tell my team or my husband, if it's something with our relationship, or my friend or whatever. I literally say, I mean, people know I practice the Hotshot Rule, so it's not weird for me to say I was practicing the Hotshot Rule. But if someone doesn't know it, I'll just simply say I was thinking, right? I was thinking, if you were in my seat tomorrow, you would take action on this immediately, and not stopping there and saying, I'm thinking about it, but blowing people away and saying, and I want you to know I did it. And every time, almost every time I have that full cycle of the Hotshot Rule, I envision someone I admire in my role. I ask myself, what is the one thing and first thing they would do differently in my seat? I take action on it. And then I tell my team. Almost every time someone says some version of what took you so long, or no kidding, that's a priority, right? Because other people see us more clearly. And the people who are closer to a situation often know what the right thing to do is long before the leader takes action. And yet other people lack the authority, they lack the language to fully articulate a problem or solution, and they lack the authority to do something about it, because many things are mine to change. And so this practice not only allows me to do at least one thing noticeably better every week. I now do it every Sunday. It started out quarterly, became monthly. Now it's Sunday, every Sunday. And then, as I mentioned, it's almost the way I think now. But the last part of the exercise has also helped me build a reputation of vulnerability, of never being done growing. People are more open to coaching me, criticizing me, and bringing things up because they see I do it to myself. And it trains this, like, I'm never done. I mean, obviously, by acknowledging that if someone else were in my seat, they'd do something different and better, and then doing it different and better, I am in another way saying I was not doing it as best I could have. And then doing something about it and moving the F on, right? Like
right.
moving on. So that this Hotshot Rule it's a thing, it's a practice, it's a belief system. And it's a form of self-coaching. I do believe in external coaching. I do believe in actually getting the opinions of other people to color our thinking. But this is one of the techniques I use to, again, ask, answer, and act.
It's so powerful. Just that idea of having fresh eyes in your experience, not biased by the incremental progress that you've had over the past year, but really somebody coming in and seeing in a new way, oh, wow, you changing this thing could have a huge improvement, even though your life is good relative to where it was a year ago, or you've grown as a leader. But really, again, I think what you mentioned, knowing what to prioritize or where to spend your time, oftentimes having that external viewpoint is so powerful. So thank you for sharing that rule, Kat.
And I'd add, Warren, the responsibility for us to do this as we mature, as we have more formal leadership responsibility or more reputational authority. The responsibility for us to do this lies on our shoulders, because it just, the distance between me and the customer or me and the community, it grows as the company grows. And I have this fear. I don't have a lot of fears, but one of them is being out of touch with those who matter most. And certainly in a company, that's the frontline employees and the community, customers or fans or whatever the business model is. In my personal life, it's my family and my closest friends. And I don't want to, react when there's fire. I want to see the smoke. Heck, I want to see the the fire while it's burning and just make sure it gets fully put out, or see the opportunity. Sometimes it's defense. It's about predicting and solving for problems before they get big, but it's also about seeing opportunities when they're little seedlings sprouting out of the ground. And a lot of people just step over them. But if you stay really close to the action, you see the sprout and you're like, oh, damn, that needs fertilizer. Like, that's the jam. There's something there. And it allows us as leaders to get more out of the rich lived experiences of people around us, even if it is the act of simply envisioning them in our roles. And I'll bridge it to Clubhouse, as I did at the beginning. As someone who's run these billion-dollar brands for many years, one of the beautiful things about jumping into a new platform, certainly as early as I did in Clubhouse, it keeps the beginner's mind fresh. It keeps you humble. It helps you discover together and be uncomfortable. And even in the early days of holding rooms and building Leadership Lab, I would DM people afterward and say, tell me one thing I could have done differently to make that a better experience for you. And people would tell me, they're like, a bunch of us had our hands raised and you didn't bring us up. And yes, there's a part of me that was like, well, damn, I can't bring everybody up. But at the same time, what that meant was I could have done a better job explaining the format of the room, how I was running the room, as you've done so well, checking in more frequently in Clubhouse. But yes, you can kind of learn that as you see people leaving, coming and going, if you're scanning the audience. But if you're really into the conversation, you're probably not doing that. And so asking, and not only helped me learn and get better in a new space, it also said to people, of course, I couldn't reach out to everyone, but that I give a shit, right? That I care. Like, I'm asking because I actually care. I actually want it to be a great experience. I am not sitting up here to listen to myself talk. I'm enjoying the conversations, but I want you to care. I want you to be like, man, that was a great 5 minutes that I popped in, or man, that was a great 10 minutes. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to do that. And I'll follow you and, keep an eye out and an ear out for the next time you share. I mean, that really matters. And so this whole set of leadership tips we share in the Knowable course that are really extensions of my Leadership Lab and Clubhouse conversation, so it can live on in a way, is also predicated on the assumption that I care more about others than myself, that the time we spend as a leader is all about the impact of those we have the responsibility for touching and influencing, and the vision and culture that we shape. A lot of this advice falls flat if that basic appreciation or belief system isn't in place. And I'm not criticizing, by the way, people who don't have that belief. There are lots of reasons. Some go through a season of being more focused on self, than on the other. A lot of really good reasons. But this advice isn't as helpful if there isn't a basic assumption that I'm here to serve, I'm here for others.
You covered so much ground there, Kat. And thank you for the Knowable mention. And I'll do a quick final reset for anyone who's joining a little bit late. And then I want to talk more about asking for help, because the Hotshot Rule that you just talked about is a way to self-analyze. Asking for help is a way to actually get fresh eyes and fresh input on your experience. And you talk about this in the Knowable course that's available for free on the Knowable app. Just check us out at knowable.fyi to go deeper onto all of this stuff. So just a reminder, we're talking with Kat Cole. Kat has led billion-dollar brands, including Cinnabon and Jamba Juice and Auntie Anne, among others. She has put together some of her distilled her lessons in leadership into a free course that's available on Knowable. Knowable is an audio-first learning platform. You can check us out again at knowable.fyi, and do follow the club and follow Kat Cole and the others that are up here on stage. On Knowable, we host weekly live discussions on Clubhouse with leading thinkers and authors, and we're so grateful to Kat Cole for sharing her time and sharing her hard-earned lessons about being a leader. So Kat, your final section in your Knowable course is how to ask for help effectively. And so I want to ask you how to know when to ask for help, and then also how to go about doing it. When do you seek out a mentor or advice from somebody else in your career? How do you know when the right time is?
Yeah, I do want to separate mentor, because it can be such a heavy word, from day-to-day help, and
right.
so
Thanks.
I think they do get over. No, I love that you asked it that way, because I do think they get wrongly entangled. And then it makes what could otherwise be very accessible help from anyone around us feel inaccessible, that it can only come from a well-known, well-respected leader or someone who's deeply into a space. And some of the best help I've had in my life and in my career have come from peers, people earlier in their journey, students. So I do want to decouple it for a moment, but I will come back to mentoring, because I do encourage people to think about it maybe a little differently than is typically proposed. But for help, I think it comes in many ways. And it's one of the things that I've loved about the live nature of Leadership Lab and Clubhouse rooms, is there are many ways to get help. And I have found one of the best ways to get help is to give help, right? To be supportive to others, to often find yourself in conversations where you're being generous with your experience and your expertise when and where it is appropriate. There is something about being a helper that increases the likelihood that you are a helpee. And so a lot of help doesn't have to be requested, although I do believe it's important to get good at asking for what you need and want in an appropriate and respectable way, so that people at least are aware of what you need and want. And if they are in a position to help and support, they can. But this idea of giving, like in Leadership Lab, such a difference between these live discussions like this or my weekly office hours, and then taking snippets of that and having it sort of recorded in perpetuity on Knowable for people to download, is this ability for help to be customized, help these live workshopping sessions, being willing to not only help others, which creates a reputation of generosity, but then being willing to share your own needs, to be vulnerable and open. It seems to allow the help that I need to come to me even when I'm not asking for it, or make it easier to ask, because people say absolutely or no problem right away. It's a lot more daunting, not impossible, but it can be more daunting to ask for help and assistance when we're coming in cold, when there's not a relationship, when there's not a symbiotic connection of helpfulness. It can be tough. Sometimes you have to, right? You're in a moment of need. You haven't had the space in your universe to invest in communities, and you need help, and you should ask for help. It is certainly easier when you invest in relationships and helping others over time. And I remember a time where I was 26. I was leading the board of directors of a nonprofit. That's really young to be leading a board of directors.
Yeah,
and I inherited a mess in this nonprofit. I mean, all kinds of stuff that was going on that had been sort of people had turned a blind eye to and allowed to happen. And because I had fresh eyes, because I was naive, I think my youth was both my gift and my burden in this situation, because I came into it and I was like, WTF, like this smells wrong. It looks wrong. It actually makes me feel icky, and we got to fix it or I'm going to go. That was pretty much the headline. But there were layers of anxiety and complexity around addressing it, because there were basically, people creating business for themselves in ways that weren't necessarily appropriate in this poor little nonprofit. And I went to a well-known leader in the industry who had been a part of the founding team years prior to this nonprofit, who had a reputation of being kind. That was it. And it just so happens that I had mentored some of his employees. He was a CEO of a well-known restaurant company. It just so happens that I had mentored some of his employees through an industry organization years prior. I knew who he was by reputation, but we had never met. And I reached out to him over email, and I said, I know you have a place in your heart for this organization. I'm troubled by what I've discovered. I would love some guidance on how to approach this. Could you carve out some time for me? And he said, absolutely. Meet me at the private airport. He had a private plane. That was, nice. I thought, so fancy. I pull up in my beat up Jeep Cherokee with paint stains in the back. I'm like, I hope he doesn't see my car. And
Parked far away. Yeah.
Go into the FBO, this little private airport, and grab a cup of coffee. And he was just so generous. And I wasn't looking for him to fix my problem, although he ended up partly offering to. I just said, here's my feeling. Here's my reaction.
And here's what's making me nervous. One of the people I had to deal with was an attorney. Attorneys are scary when they're not on your side. And I just told him, I said, I'm scared. I'm nervous that I'm going to screw this up. I'm nervous that there's a 20% chance I'm wrong about what I'm seeing. And I just feel like these people are not going to be happy to be investigated. I mean, whoever is. And he just looked at me and he said, you're doing the right thing. Here's some backstory you may not know that will be helpful. And he said, I have to tell you, a leader is defined by tough times. And I believe that great leaders have candle power, that when the wind blows harder, their light shines brighter. And so he said, wherever it's messier, that is probably where the leader is needed most. If you need me along the way, call me, but you're doing the right thing. And the time with him, the help I got from him was more about, a little bit of background and technical expertise on how to approach some of this. But more than anything, it was confidence. It gave me the confidence. Often we are asking for help in advice or specifics, but what we actually need is ovaries. What we actually need is courage. That's what I mean by ovaries.
I was like, yeah.
I knew that would probably.
What is that word? Yeah.
But that, the courage, right? The willingness without the conviction that we're right, but the willingness to go in what is definitely uncharted territory. What is there are definitely dangers ahead. It's not there. It's it's obvious they're there. You can see them and they're kind of letting you know that they're there as a technique to keep you away. And so that is just an example of, here I am, the chair of the board, supposed to be the one, quote, with all the answers, right, that makes the decisions. But the best leaders ask the best questions. Again, ask, answer, act. Ask questions and get better at asking the right questions, including ones that are about help, allowing people to answer. And in this case, I allowed the advice to color my thinking. Sometimes people ask and hear advice or get help, but they don't actually internalize it. And that's okay, right? It's help there for you to take or not. But what a shame if that actually should be coloring your thinking and you have the opportunity to leapfrog growth by benefiting from others' perspectives. And I have seen that play out over and over. Oh, by the way, later, he ended up introducing me to Ted Turner, who was also a founding member of this nonprofit organization years prior. And when I had the opportunity to get my master's, I did not have a bachelor's, by the way. I take the GMAT and the GRE and score much higher than their minimum entrance requirements, but they also required I had letters from well-known CEOs. And I reached out to Ted Turner, and this guy who became a mentor, Phil Hickey, reached out to Ted and said, Kat's doing amazing work in the industry. She's making tough decisions. It's going to keep this organization thriving. You should meet her. I ended up doing a ton of work with him and his foundation. And so when I wouldn't have known I would have had this need years later, 4 years later, when they said, we need letters from CEOs. I'd only worked in one company since I was 17 at that point. I was still with Hooters. I started at 17, and at this point I was 28. And I reached out to him and said, would you mind writing a recommendation letter to Georgia State University? I've been accepted to their MBA program pending advocacy letters. And he not only wrote an amazing letter, he reached out to other CEOs who knew me reputationally. And I ended up with I don't remember how many, 10 or 12 recommendation letters from crazy high level CEOs that I was blown away. But that, there's layers there in that story. It's humility and curiosity and courage and confidence. And again, it's asking, answering, and acting differently. And over time, that builds a reputation and it makes people want to help you.
Yes. I think we could talk for hours about that particular case study, and so much that you mentioned it is talked about in the Knowable course. And I'm glad it's there as a repository of some of your best lessons. So for anyone listening, highly encourage you to check it out. It is additive to what Kat is sharing here. She's really just scratching the surface of some of her wisdom after having spent over a decade managing billion-dollar brands and working with teams of all sizes, both in the for-profit world and the nonprofit world too. Kat, I want to seg from this idea of asking for help and your recommendation on it to opening it up to other people who might have a question for you. And so I know, though, also you're running short on time, so we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Apologies in advance if we can't get to everyone, but looking for concise questions that somebody has for Kat around leadership, either something that we've already talked about or that is top of mind for you, that we may be able to workshop here. How does that sound to you, Kat?
Perfectamundo.
Awesome. So, Kedar, you're up on stage. You actually also have a course on Knowable. You're a wealth manager. You worked at Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan and UBS. You have an amazing course that I actually listened to for the first time this weekend on personal finance and building wealth in an unequal world. It's such an important topic, and I hope that anybody, especially in their 20s, checks it out. And it's available to listen to for free with a free trial on Knowable. But Kedar, do you have any questions for Kat or any comments that you want to add to the discussion?
Yeah, no, thank you, Kat. Thank you for your words and wisdom. I love the fact that you touched on visualization. That's something that most find it challenging to kind of put themselves in that place when it comes to visualizing themselves in someone they admire. So, I would love to just have you unpack that slightly further, if you can, in regards to visualization. And I feel like a lot of people still see it as taboo in regards to like what it can do for you in positioning you to kind of manifest the things that you want in your life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for me, I take a very operational approach to visualization. It is less about aspiration and more about which visualization can be very powerful, creating the right aspiration, that North Star that you're working forward, and what you see in your mind's eye becomes your belief system and colors your thinking and your actions and your decisions. And it is incredibly powerful. There's a reason some of the greatest athletes in the world have visualization as a critical component, a non-negotiable component of their training and preparation. It is that powerful. But for me, everyone has a different style. Visualization is really practiced through the Hotshot Rule, and it is more about what can I do now, right? Some people use visualization for what can be possible far down the road. I naturally have an abundance mindset. I naturally believe the world is far more impressionable to my existence than it actually is. To a fault. It's, everybody's got an inclination, and that's mine. And so what I need that visualization can benefit is more about what to do differently now. Sometimes there are people who look so far out into the future, that is my inclination, that we miss the opportunities to do important things now that actually get us closer. So for me, visualization via the Hotshot Rule, envisioning someone else in my role now and asking myself, what's one thing they would do differently? A very controllable, actionable thing, one thing. And then committing to take action on it. Not because I've told anyone I'm going to, because I want to. And then I'm going to tell people I did it, right? So that's how visualization, there is something about envisioning someone else in my role that helps me come to the conclusion of what that one thing is that I need to do better this week or can do better. It helps me get to that conclusion more quickly.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kat. That's really useful and valuable. So, Julie, you had your hand raised. Did you have a question for Kat?
Thank you, Kat. Love following you. I've adopted you as hello. I believe kind of as you do is, I believe mentorship, right? We look at that and we're trying to figure out what does that model look like. And here in Texas right now, we're having wonderful storms again. And so we had just started to talk about mentorship a few moments ago and my internet cut out. So, instead of mentorship for this one, can I shift the idea to brands and being a brand and leading well here, especially like Clubhouse? I think it's such a great example. And Knowable looks like a great representation of what a brand can do here in Clubhouse. But any more to speak to that would be fabulous.
Yeah. You mean brands, and specifically brands showing up on Clubhouse?
Yes, ma'am. Exactly. Thanks.
Yeah. One of my favorite topics right now. Here's what I believe. I believe, and I think we all do, but it's important to say it this way. that brands are human. Like brands are uniquely human. They are nothing without their humans, meaning the people who are in the company and certainly their customers and broader employees. And if brands are uniquely human, there is something really powerful about a brand through its humans, not through its logo, although it's very easy to change your avatar to a logo if you so choose, at least for a moment or a room. And I think that's really fun for the PTR game. Showing up as the human. So it's, Warren, the founder of Knowable, talking about his company, interacting live with the many stakeholders in it. And that to me is a far more authentic exploration of a business and a brand than a flyer, an email blast, a tweet. I mean, those techniques of marketing are important. They still have impact. But Clubhouse, like a brand showing up on Clubhouse through its people, is so much more human because you are literally only interacting through the people who represent the brand. It is not edited. It is not editable. It is so real and so raw because it is now. And yes, it can then be captured and repurposed in other recorded mediums like a Knowable or a pod. But I remember when I first took over Cinnabon, and this was before pay for play on Twitter, before the algorithm, before a lot of leaders were on the platform. And we, as I mentioned, it was in the recession, sales were in the shitter, the marketing budget was like zero. And so me, as the president of Cinnabon, interacting on Twitter, again, it was the early stages. So when you spoke, it actually organically landed. Anyone who followed you saw it. No longer the case. But that was so powerful because I could talk about what was going on in the brand or the business. And I will tell you, in the whole portfolio of focus and largely in the food space, we experienced more traction, more fan love than many other brands because maybe it's because I was younger in that role. And so I was more digitally native. I just love being a lifelong learner and jumping in early to platforms. They're not all for me, but ones like that and ones like Clubhouse are. And it worked, like it resonated. I talked about what we were going through now would be called building in public. That wasn't a term then. VC Twitter wasn't even a thing. And then the fans commented, and then they showed us love, and then I showed them more love. And then it was a freaking love fest, right? Like who can be a bigger fan of each other? Me of the fans or the fans of us? And so that was a very human way to interact on social, but with limitations because of print and characters. Clubhouse is like totally on the other end of the spectrum where, yes, of course, there are perceived downsides to anyone hopping on a live platform with people they don't know. But there are ways to manage that without losing the authenticity. And I just think as someone who's run brands, what a low friction, easy way to hop in a room. Like if I were still running our brands, and I did this in 2020, quite a bit with Cinnabon and Jamba Juice, but just say, launch a Jamba club and host a room. Here are the 3 flavors we're thinking about launching. Come tell us which one's the best idea. Come talk to us about what you want out of it. Like, that is amazing. To do that in such a low friction way from your jammy jams with your baby in the stroller or whatever, and to have people come and go and then have the opportunity for so many more people, back to my core thesis of running business, that you have to stay close to the action, to use this as a layer to stay so close to customers or brand curious. I like the fact that brands can access brand curious people. Like they might not be a fan of your brand, but they scroll through the hallway and they see you're hosting an interesting discussion and they become brand curious. That's consideration, top of the funnel, that you would typically pay so much money for. And so I find it fascinating that more brands aren't here. And I am excited by the growth of brands here. And I'm certainly a part of that. I mean, this is a meta example, right? Knowable is a business and a brand that has launched a club, which is the right way for a brand to interact, and hosting a live discussion around what they do. That is not advertising per se. It's rather a real live demonstration of the humans connected to the product. And then if people dig it, they stay and maybe they go explore it as well. I mean, it's a no-brainer to me, but I'm I understand I have an unfair advantage because I both ran brands, huge global brands, and consider myself native to Clubhouse. So the connections and the opportunities are so obvious to me. The upsides are far greater than any downsides. And not a but, it is a unique platform with a unique community where expertise is required to properly navigate it. It's why you see popular moderators and consistent content creators and collectives of people like Audio Collective, but many others that pool together to support each other and help brands navigate the space, because there are nuances that if you aren't spending the time to appreciate the nuances of audio only and Clubhouse specifically in the community, you miss some opportunities to optimize the Clubhouse experience. But that's not hard to find partners that help a brand navigate the space.
Julie, thank you so much for the question, and Kate, Kat, for the thoughtful answer around Clubhouse.
Both.
I think definitely, speaking from as the co-founder of a company, I view Clubhouse as such a powerful way to meet community members and to meet fans, and to, as you mentioned, Kat, just expose ourselves to what we're about in a very human way. I actually, not to do another meta plug, but on Knowable, we have a course called Branding for Founders. And it was a really powerful course for me because there was one insight in particular, which is people like to follow people more than they like to follow brands, right? Elon Musk has way more followers than Tesla or SpaceX. I'm not saying that he's the right person for everyone, but this idea of having a human voice behind a brand, I think, is increasingly important in a world where you can do that. You can find who the people are behind the company, and that feels really important. Kat, I know we're running late on time. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I do.
Awesome. So I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your name right, but Karen or Karan? Maybe you can tell us how to pronounce your name.
Yeah, it's pronounced as Karan. Thanks for asking me. Yeah. Hey,
Karan.
Kat. Hey. Yeah. Thanks for again hosting the session, Warren. Been a big fan of Knowable, and I've been really glad to see how the product's evolved. So this is a great addition. And Kat, thank you so much for everything you're doing for helping us become better leaders. Really liked the session yesterday with Simon Sinek too. And just had a question around visioning, because you and Simon both speak about how it's important to get people motivated and excited about the why, and then converting that why and the vision into strategy. So for my context and situation, for someone who just joined the team 30 days in, I clearly see a gap where there's no vision, there's no strategy. I've been spending a lot of time listening and asking questions and getting to know people, but when and how do you go from that stage of listening to then saying, okay, we need a vision and a strategy, and then how do you lead without, how do you lead and influence without authority? And then how do you also get people to feel like there's this shared ownership and we need this vision to exist and the strategy to exist? Does that make sense?
Yes. One, I will say we definitely do not have the time for me to give those amazing questions the attention they rightly deserve. So I'm going to do my best to connect them and share some thoughts, because they're great questions. From leaning in to making a call on vision and strategy to influencing without authority. Those are all courses in and of themselves, and big ones and common ones. So I love that you brought them up. One, influencing without authority. I'll start there. It wasn't your first question, but one of the few that I think is widely applicable. Is just about doing the fucking work. It is about taking action. That people gravitate toward those who do. It can be easy to be enamored by those who say, but people follow those who do. And I have learned that in organizations where in every role I have been the youngest, the only at the table, the other, right? That has been my life after growing up so dirt poor in such a jacked up household, to raising my sisters, to supporting my mom, working from a very young age, and then being an executive in a $800 million company at 26. There were many unwelcoming moments, but there were far more powerful moments than there were unwelcoming. Like the net of it was positive. But what made the net of it positive is that I defined my success by the people who mattered. And there's a tension there, right? There's like executives and investors, and there are people who matter in a way that you can't lose sight of. Their support, their understanding of the work we do, it matters. They make decisions. They are the people sitting around the table. At the same time, there were moments in my career where I didn't have amazing relationships with everyone at that table, or I didn't feel the love, or I didn't feel respected because I was so young. And I am a walking narrative violation. That is my brand. I was helping to run Hooters and grow it around the world and leading some of the largest women's advocacy organizations. I was running Cinnabon, yet personally investing in health and wellness. Like, I am a walking narrative violation. And because of that, I'm very accustomed to discomfort and have learned that sometimes the thing that got me the most in trouble was being worried about the wrong people's opinions, or at least putting too much weight on it. That doesn't mean not respecting those who have a say in my future. It means when there were times where an executive was maybe a little difficult or judgmental of me, I was able to focus more on the fact that I knew I was serving my team, that my franchisees were thrilled with the support that I was giving. And I out-relationshiped most people in any company I've ever been in, whether it's one-on-one phone calls or quick coffees or a note. Business is human. People who say business, it's not business, it's personal, are getting it all wrong, right? Business is so deeply personal. And that out-relationshiping, that ability to define my sense of self from not only the obvious higher places, but from the impact I'm making, the people around me, and use that in the appropriate combination, allows me to lead through complex times and feel more comfortable screwing up and doing the work, which then, of course, leads to influence without authority. And then I'll just bridge to your question around like strategy and vision. And the word strategy makes me kind of angry. I don't get angry very often, and I don't mean that literally. It's just so misunderstood, and everyone has a different definition. And I do think sometimes people use it as a weapon, whether they know it or not, to say, what's our strategy? And you're not strategic enough. It's like, WTF? Like, what do you mean? Exactly. Break that down for me. I can break strategy down. Can you? And if you can't, let me teach you. And then let's focus on which part of it we're missing, right? Breaking down strategy into simply, where do we want to play and how do we want to win? Like, what game are we in and how are we tackling that? And then double clicking and triple clicking and all of the deeper dives to understand what needs to support that. What are the pillars? What are the key initiatives? What resources do we need, et cetera? And what are we basically choosing to do and not to do? As a result of that, sometimes it's better to not use the word strategy in some companies because it gets weaponized and people have different definitions, and to actually break it down into its parts. And I find that allows more progress to be made, right? Where are we going to play? Who are we competing with? Who are we not competing with in our industry and out? How do we win? What are we saying is our distinction? And how do we lean into that and protect it? Those are ways to talk about strategy that feel democratized. They're more digestible, and it's more clear to everyone, no matter, whether they've been to business school or not, or who they've worked for. It's just a little easier to have the conversation. And then vision, that does need to come from the top, but be informed by the many. And it tweaks in degrees over time, but generally stays the true north. And people also get this confused. Vision and mission and values gets confused. Every business school, every manager I've ever worked for or had work for me have convoluted them all. So I'm a big fan of breaking things down into their parts. I prefer saying North Star. Like, what is our guiding light? What is our North Star? Yes, what I mean is vision, but sometimes people confuse vision and mission. And so I like using North Star. And the how to know when. The how to know when is, do you generally feel like the team is on the same page? And if not, you probably need to come back to, is this articulated consistently or clearly enough?
Karan,
Thanks so
thank you so
much.
much for the
Yeah.
question, and Kat for the extensive and thoughtful answer. You've shared so much wisdom already in this 75 minutes of chat. I want to do one last question with Maya, who's been very patiently waiting to ask. But just a quick refresh for anyone who's joining right now. Kat Cole has run billion-dollar brands, including Cinnabon and Auntie Anne's and Jamba. She's also very active in the nonprofit world. She was an executive at a very young age and has an untraditional background. She's a personally very inspiring leader to me. I've learned a ton from her, and she's sharing so much of what she's learned in a recorded audio first mini course that's available totally for free on Knowable. You can find us at Knowable FYI on Twitter and Instagram, and just go check out our website, knowable.fyi, to hear more from Kat about what she's learned about leadership and success. And some of the rules that she shared in this conversation. In the course, she talks about asking better questions, about this habit of asking, answering, and acting. Kat, you shared some really great examples about how Cinnabon had a survey question that was a really leading question and could have led to results that were not actually beneficial to the company, and how asking the right questions can have such a transformative impact on somebody's career as a leader and also on their life as well. One rule in particular that you have and that we talked about today is the Hotshot Rule. You imagine somebody who you admire taking your job or taking your position in a relationship and seeing through their eyes the one thing that could have such a big impact that it would dramatically improve your situation. You take action on that thing once you see it with those fresh eyes, and then you tell your team or your partner, whoever is affected, about your process. So I love that rule. You talk about it more in the course, and I recommend everyone follow Kat already on Clubhouse. If you're not already, do so on Clubhouse and on Twitter. And also, just if you click that green house button up top, you can follow Knowable. We have weekly lessons with leading thinkers and authors like Kat, where we try to distill their best ideas into actionable courses on Knowable. So last question from you, Maya. Do you want to ask Kat anything about leadership?
Warren, thank you for inviting me up. Kat, you're one of the first people I stumbled on in Clubhouse, and you're amazing. And I just want to thank you for your mentorship.
Thank you.
No problem. I also want to be fully honest with you all that I was listening on the way to pick up my kiddo. I put the volume down once I picked him up so that I could pay attention to him, since I've kind of gotten addicted to Clubhouse.
Oh, yes, we've been there. We've all been there.
So I opened the app back up and realized I was still in this meeting. But your insight is incredible. And I just wanted to say thank you for the mentorship you're providing from afar. I think so many of us would like to, be able to access you very accessibly, and we can't, but at least this is one step towards that. So just thank you for being out there and for all your great advice.
Oh, thank you, Maya. That's so kind. And it really does. I mean, I'm sure like many of you who've had these conversations on Clubhouse, it's the reason all through 2020, I've hosted weekly office hours, Wednesdays at noon Eastern, and like middle of the day Eastern, midweek. I pick a theme from the companies that I advise or what I've written about in my newsletter, or just other things that have come up in great discussions in places like Clubhouse. And we workshop them. Like there's a core group that kind of rotates through of amazing speakers and co-moderators. We always bring several people up throughout or ask people to put comments or questions in their bio. I love it. I mean, it really does feed my soul as a leader, and to be able to connect and one to few. This is very intimate. If you look at us as a speaker box, it's like we're at a cafe, but then one to many because of those who get to pop in and listen. And then beyond that, recording and capturing and then extending into other places for some of those snippets to live in perpetuity, like Knowable. I think just feels like the best of all worlds. So please do, for anyone who wants to workshop these topics. I think this week we are talking about the power of voice and speech in leadership, and I'm co-hosting one of the world's greatest authorities in voice. She actually is on set in a major motion picture right now and coaches some of the greatest actors of our time, and teaches them how to use voice, which is so relevant to Clubhouse, like leaders speaking on audio only platforms. It's broadly applicable, but really interesting when you start to interact as a human on audio only platforms. And then I think I'm doing a pop-up on Friday for Feedback Fridays, just workshopping feedback. And so even if you can't get up in the speaker box because you're busy or you've got babies or we just can't get to you, I always try to keep my DMs open and touch on the themes that people put in the hand raise queue in their bio. So please do reach out to me if there's a topic or a theme that you're recognizing that you think could be really good to workshop live on Clubhouse. I really do love doing that, and I learn from all of these great conversations.
Maya, thank you so much for the comment, and Kat, for making yourself so available to people who are hoping to learn from you. So as you mentioned, if you're listening and not already following Kat on Clubhouse, please do so. She has a bunch of amazing sessions like Leadership Lab and office hours that she mentioned. And then she's also distilled a lot of the lessons that she's learned over the course of her career on leadership and success onto Knowable. And those are available totally free. So you can follow the Knowable Club here on Clubhouse and then find us at Knowable FYI. Kat, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your lessons and your wisdom. You've inspired me to think about how to improve as a leader. I've learned a ton from you, and I hope and I'm sure that lots of other people will as well. We covered so much ground here in this hour and 20 minutes that I think it would take me a long time to unpack it all. But I encourage everyone who might have joined late or missed some of it or hasn't heard of you already, Kat, to check out the lessons that you shared on Knowable. Thank you to everyone who asked a question. I'm sorry that we're not able to get to everyone whose hands are still up. Kat, anything else that you want to mention in closing?
No, I just think this muscle of asking, answering, and then acting on progressively better questions as we move through the world is a hack. I mean, it is a way to get the most out of our own minds and how we've actually amassed perspective and knowledge that we don't always harness. And help us sort of move off the dime and take action on things a little bit more often than we might otherwise do without these practices. And certainly if you're on a team, it can help build a really powerful reputation of being both humble and courageous, constantly being on a journey to figure out a better way to do things and then taking action. There are as many team benefits as there are individual benefits. So thanks so much. Thanks, Warren, for the opportunity to share some of those lessons on Knowable and for holding the space on Clubhouse.
My pleasure. Thank you again, Kat. Thanks everyone for listening. Hope everyone has a great Monday, and we'll see you all later. Cheers.
Hey everyone, Ryan here again from Knowable. If you made it this far, I just wanted to remind you that we do live events like this one every Friday, and really hope you join us for the next one. Just follow us on Twitter at KnowableFYI to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Now you know.
Knowable. Now you know.